So we're going to be talking about sugar today, and this is a great time to be talking about it because we just had Valentine's Day, so I'm sure everybody has some candy at home, been eating a lot of sugar from Valentine's or even really just being at home in general. So we're going to talk about sugar. So the objectives for this lesson is to not only just talk about sugar, but to learn about carbohydrates, because if you've done any research about sugar, you've probably gone down the carbohydrate rabbit hole. So we're going to talk about what those are, what the purposes they serve for our body. We're also going to talk about nutritive and non-nutritive sweeteners, the forms of added sugar, and recommendations for exactly how much sugar you should be eating. And then we're also going to talk about ways that you can reduce your sugar intake, specifically added sugar, whenever you're purchasing or preparing foods at home. And then we're going to talk about, there's one activity in here for setting personal goals and ways to improve your health, and we're going to do some of those as well. So, about half of American adults, which is about 117 million people, have at least one or more preventable chronic diseases, many of which are related to poor diet habits and lack of physical activity, which is kind of an alarming number. So over half of people have at least one chronic disease that could have been prevented by improved eating habits and physical activity. Among those chronic diseases are cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancer. Also, another statistic here for you all, about 2/3 of adults and nearly 1/3 of children are overweight or obese, which again is kind of an alarming number when you really think about how many people that is. And so another thing, when you think about, not only does that affect everyone's health, but it also costs a lot in medical costs. So in 2008, medical costs associated with obesity was about $147 billion. And in 2012, that increased to about $245 billion, which, when you think about it, is an insane amount of money. So investing in your health is really important. So one way we can do that is by cutting back added sugar, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to try and stay on topic because we could talk about sugar all day. I'm going to try to keep it relatively short. So some of the earliest sweet foods were fruit and honey. So obviously there's a lot of natural sugar in those things. So humans crave those sweet foods. It's just part of our human nature. And the reason that is because sugar is a form of carbohydrate, which is really easy for the human body to break down. And so it's a source of quick energy for us. And so when our body is lacking energy, we're going to be craving quick energy like sugar. So sugar cravings are totally normal. So you might have seen some of these terms whenever you're looking specifically for sugar substitutes, but we're going to go over what these terms mean and what they are. So nutritive sweeteners are going to be sweeteners that provide calories or energy. So that's going to be your regular table sugar, honey, maple syrup, any kind of sweetener that has calories in it. And your non-nutritive sweetener is going to be your low-calorie or non-calorie sweeteners. So those are going to be mostly your sugar substitutes. So that's going to be like Sweet and Low, Equal, Splenda, Stevia, those monk fruit sweeteners. So in a little while, we're also going to talk about added sugars because that's something that's come out in the new nutrition labels. If you've noticed, it doesn't only say sugars, it has a little space for added sugars now. So we'll go over those here in a little bit. And then for nutritional value, so we know sugar is a carbohydrate. So it's a quick absorbing food, and it really doesn't provide any nutrition other than calories for us, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's not where you want to have most of your calories coming from. So we want to have, if we're going to have some added sugar, we probably want to have it with something that's going to provide some nutrients, so some nutrient-dense foods. And we'll go over some of those options again later. So I just want to make a disclaimer because carbohydrates are kind of a taboo thing. A lot of people are on those low-carb diets because they think that carbohydrates is what is leading to weight gain. And that's not necessarily true. Usually what is leading to weight gain is an excess of calories or carbohydrates. So they're definitely a necessary thing. I wouldn't recommend cutting out carbohydrates, but it's something that we want to be aware that we're not eating too much of. So since we're going to be looking at nutrition labels later, I thought that we should go over some of these. Just since the sugars are shown in grams on the nutrition label and we don't go by the metric system whenever we're cooking, we're going to convert some of those to teaspoons. Because when we're looking at that label and we see grams, it doesn't always really mean too much to us because we don't know exactly how much that is in terms of teaspoons. So 4 grams of sugar is going to equal about 1 teaspoon. So 12 grams is going to be about 1 tablespoon, and then 192 grams is about 1 cup. So just something to keep in mind, especially whenever you're making things at home, exactly how much that would equate to in grams. Okay, so for added sugar, so sugar is a really sneaky thing. And if you've ever really read your nutrition labels, you'll notice there's more than 60 names for added sugar on food labels. And we'll go over what some of those are, some of the common ones. And also, some people will choose like low-fat versions of their favorite foods, like, for example, yogurt. You might choose a low-fat yogurt thinking that you're going to be cutting a lot of calories and making a better choice. But in reality, a lot of those low-fat products, they have to find some way to replace that lack of flavor from taking away the extra fat, and it's usually going to be replaced with sugar. So when you look at the label, you'll notice between the regular yogurt and the low-fat yogurt, the low-fat one will probably have more added sugar in it than the regular one. So it's not necessarily the better choice. And that's why reading your labels is so important, because you can kind of catch those things, because the packaging and the marketing for certain things like that are really trying to, they can be really misleading by telling you it's a low-fat version when in reality you're going to be eating more sugar, which isn't good. So a lot of the foods that we think are healthy have the added sugar, like yogurt, energy bars, those like juice smoothies that you can find in the produce aisle, pasta sauces, breads, sauces, condiments, all those things. So it's important to be aware of what those terms for sugar are when you're reading your labels. So here are some of the common names. A lot of these are pretty obvious that it's sugar, but there's some strange words that you may not recognize that are sneaky ways for adding sugar. So obviously you can see granulated sugar, cane sugar, molasses, honey, maple syrup, all those we know are sugar. But then you have some of these words here in the middle that a lot of people may not recognize as sugar, like sucrose, fructose, lactose, maltose, dextrose. A lot of those OS words are going to be sugar. So that's going to be a key indicator when you're looking at your labels. And then some for those non-nutritive sweeteners, so our sugar substitutes, are going to be sorbitol, xylitol, stevia, sucralose. Those are going to be key terms for those sugar substitutes. So here's a lot of the common sweeteners. So these are your common sugars. A lot of people think, and this is kind of true, a lot of people say sugar, it doesn't really matter which one you use because your body breaks it down in the same way. But when you lay it out like this, you can see they're not all necessarily equal. A lot of people will use honey over regular sugar because they think honey is a natural source of sugar. It's better for me. But when you see this, honey has some more calories in it than regular sugar. So at the bottom, granulated sugar has about 15 calories in a teaspoon, and honey has about 21, which isn't that big of a difference for a teaspoon, but whenever you're substituting a cup of honey for a cup of sugar in a recipe, those extra calories are really going to add up. So if calories is something that you're watching and you're wanting to cut down on, that is something to keep in mind. And then, like I said, sugar doesn't really supply anything to us other than calories and energy. It's really just empty calories. There's no vitamins and minerals, no fiber in it, no other nutrients other than calories. So, how much sugar do we really need? So if you've noticed on the new nutrition labels, there is a recommended daily intake on there now for sugar. There didn't used to be. So a lot of the vitamins and minerals, protein, carbohydrates, all of that already had recommended daily value percent, and sugar never did. But in the new one, it does. So the USDA recommends that you have no more than 10% of your calories from added sugar in a day. So for the average person, they probably will eat about 2,000 calories a day. And that is 200 calories of sugar, which is only about 12 teaspoons. And I think, so 12 teaspoons, if you're eating 2,000 calories, is going to be the max of added sugar you want. And we're going to talk about ways, I'm going to show you how that adds up extremely quickly. So if you're eating less than 2,000 calories, which a lot of women, especially older women are, that's going to be even less. So 12 teaspoons, especially when you're eating packaged food, adds up super quickly. So the average American adult consumes 22 teaspoons a day. So we talked about how the maximum for a 2,000 calorie diet would be 12. The average American eats almost double that in one day. So if you think about that, if you eat 22 teaspoons of sugar, added sugar each day, in a year, that's over 8,000 teaspoons of sugar, which is over 83 pounds of sugar in 1 year. So if you're having trouble losing weight and you don't know why, watch how much sugar you're eating a day, because that is going to be a lot. It's going to be an easy way to cut out a lot of unnecessary calories. And I'll show you all, I'm a visual person, so numbers don't always mean a lot of things to me. I'll show you all how much of sugar that looks like in a minute. Okay, so the dietary guidelines, we all know, my words are a little bit crammed on here. I'm sorry about that. We have some overlapping here. So I'm not going to go into this too much because you all can read. And a lot of these next two slides would take up a lot of extra time. So I'm just going to kind of brush over these quickly. So 2015, 22, or 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommend that you follow a healthy eating pattern by having a variety of food, limiting calories from added sugars, saturated fats, sodium intake, all of that. But the one we're talking about mainly today are those added sugars, and we're going to go over specifically the nutrition labels and how to catch all of those. So here's a table. This just kind of shows the current eating patterns of the standard American. And in all honesty, this chart is a little confusing to me. But just the gist of it. So it shows that most Americans are over on the recommended amount for saturated fat, oils, and added sugars and sodium. Most Americans are not getting the recommended amount of vegetables and fruit in a day, and they're eating too much added sugar, not enough protein, not enough dairy. So we're going to go over ways that we can improve that in a little bit. And on here you can see, here's a pie chart that shows where most of the Americans are getting their added sugar per day. And most of it is coming from beverages. So those are your sugar-sweetened beverages like soda and fruit juice, sports drinks, things like that. And the other large one is snacks and sweets. So the bulk of added sugar are coming from sugar-sweetened beverages and snacks. Something to keep in mind. So if you will teach this lesson in your clubs later on, one of the activities that you do is practicing mindful eating. And you do that by tasting grapes, just noticing the sweetness of them. We're not going to do that today because we're virtual, but that is in the lesson. So I would recommend doing that if you all do this later in person. We're just going to skip these slides for now. Okay. Now we're going to talk about sugar's role in health. We obviously know too much sugar is a bad thing. So like I mentioned before, sugar is an empty calorie. Empty calorie, so it doesn't provide us any nutrients per se. It just provides us with calories. And sugar can be villainized a lot. So, you might see a lot of people trying no sugar diets like Whole30 and Paleo and all of those bad diets. And sugar is not a bad thing. Like I said, our human instinct is to crave sugar because it's quick energy. So having sugar is not bad. Having too much sugar is bad. So too much sugar, which we've already discussed, the average American does have too much sugar, leads to obesity and weight gain. And obesity and weight gain is a strong risk factor for those chronic diseases that I mentioned earlier, like diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure. So sugar is not what's causing those chronic diseases. It's the aftermath of having too much sugar and having excess weight that causes those. So something to keep in mind. And also it causes poor dental health. So you have tooth decay and cavities, which is another concern, especially in children. So ways that we can reduce added sugar in the diet is to choose fresh fruits and or canned fruits in their own juices as opposed to heavy syrup. Cut back on those snack foods and desserts because, as we saw in that pie chart, that is where a lot of Americans are getting their added sugar. When you do want something sweet, instead of choosing like a cake or a packaged cookie or something like that, you could choose fresh fruit or the canned fruit and fruit juice. And then also watching portion sizes, because as you'll see here in a little bit, portion is really important, especially when you're looking at your labels and kind of monitoring the amount of sugar. And it's easy to be eating too much and not really realizing it. And then last, you can use, if you're like a soda person or you don't really like drinking water all day, you like flavor in your drinks, instead of drinking soda or juices with added sugar, you can try to find a low calorie or calorie free option. Also, you can find no sugar added substitutes for a lot of things, like applesauce or fruit or yogurt, even like sauces and condiments like pasta sauce. You can find low sugar and no sugar versions. That's why looking at your labels is going to be really helpful for that. You can use fruit as a sweetener in cereal, yogurt, and oatmeal instead of sugar or honey or maple syrup. Again, choosing beverages with less added sugar because, as we discussed earlier, sugar-sweetened beverages is the culprit for too much added sugar for a lot of people. And then practice mindful eating. So that was one thing that you would do in that activity with the grapes, is just taking your time eating, because a lot of people, especially when we're busy, we don't really take the time to enjoy our food. We just kind of eat it as quickly as we can to get back to what we were doing. But really just taking the time to chew your food, eat slowly, recognize when you're full is really important. And then last, if you're eating out at restaurants, which many of us probably aren't doing anymore, looking at the nutrition information, which is a lot easier to find nowadays than it used to be. And that way you can make smarter choices when you're eating out, because you'd be surprised when you look at the nutrition information at a lot of restaurants. It might change in your mind about what you order. When you're baking at home, some ways you can cut back on sugar is by just cutting back on the amount of sugar that's recommended in the recipe. So If you cut out about 25% of sugar when you're baking, it really won't make that much of a difference as far as the taste and the texture go. But one rule of thumb is you can, for every cup of flour in a recipe, you don't want to add any more than 1/2 cup of sugar. And then same thing for quick breads and muffins, 1 tablespoon per cup. For yeast breads, 1 teaspoon of sugar per cup of flour. It is necessary for yeast breads because yeast eats sugar, so you don't want to cut it out because you want your yeast to rise. And then you can add some cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla, some things that you have with sweeter foods. But even though that's not necessarily adding sweetness, it might kind of fool your brain into thinking you're eating something sweet because you have cinnamon and nutmeg and vanilla in your sweet foods. And then obviously we can use some sugar substitutes when we're baking. And this really is going to take some trial and error because not everyone has the same taste for sugar sweeteners or sugar substitutes. So you're not going to have the same product, obviously, because it's not going to be the same as sugar. But usually for most of those baking substitutes, at least, you can use them 1-to-1 ratio in your baked goods. And then, like I mentioned before, you can also just reduce the amount of sugar by 25% without much change. So when you're shopping, things that you can do is obviously to read your nutrition labels and kind of compare between products. And then looking at those added sugars, and we'll go over that here in a little bit. I'll show you all the labels. And then memorizing some of those common names for sweeteners and sugars that I mentioned earlier so that you can recognize the ingredients quickly. And then when you look at the ingredients, actually, you know what, I'll just go over that later because it makes a lot more sense when you're looking at the label. Let's see, some other things you can do is choose fewer processed foods because those are going to be the ones that have added sugar most of the time. So if you've ever heard shop the perimeter of the store, that means just shopping your produce, your bakery, the deli, and that's pretty much it, right? All of those middle aisles is going to be all those packaged foods that have sugar and all those things you don't want. So shopping the perimeter of the store mainly is going to be pretty key in cutting back on a lot of those things. Okay, a lot of those other things are pretty straightforward, so I won't go over those. Okay, so here's the food label. So on the left here is the old one, and on the right is the new one. So you can see the differences when you compare them side by side. Obviously, the first thing that your eyes are drawn to and the one on the right are the calories that are in very large numbers and they're bold. But if you go on down, you can see total sugars. There's now this little sidebar under here that is included added sugars. So you can see exactly how much sugar is coming from added sugar. So sugar that's not naturally in this product already. Whereas before, I just told you regular sugar. And then another thing too is the serving size is now in bold, which I'll show you all later. Serving size is really important to pay attention to because a lot of packaged foods can be misleading because they'll have the serving size be really small. And so if you don't pay attention to that, your eyes are drawn to this right here, the calories. And you're like, oh, that's not very many calories. And then you realize a normal serving of what you would usually eat is 2 or 3 times what the serving size on the packages. And you're eating quite a bit more than what you thought. So those are the differences. So this is your PowerPoint. So in a minute, I'm going to switch to my document camera and we're going to go over some examples of finding the added sugar and the activities that come with your own lesson. You all have an evaluation, a paper evaluation, which you can return to your agent. I'm also going to put a link to a corporate evaluation if you want to fill that out too. It's the same thing. I just made it online. So I'll do that at the end. So if you all don't mind to take a couple minutes to fill that out at the end, I much appreciate it. So are there any questions so far? I know this is a lot of information. It's kind of a lot to go over in 30 minutes. But before we move on, does anyone have comments or questions so far? So you'll have to unmute yourself if you have a question.
Me, okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, in that sugar, the added sugar percentage and the other sugar percentage, do you add those together for your daily requirement?
No, so the recommended daily requirement was only for added sugar. So we're not going to really count the natural sugar because there are natural sugars in like fruit and honey and all of that. So what we're going to be paying attention to is just the added sugar because that's what we're going to want to cut back on. And I'll go over that in more detail here in a minute.
Thank you much. Now, do I need to unmute? Do I need to mute myself?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah. So I believe that natural, of course, sugar would be the best option. But what about, saccharose, fructose? Are these artificial sweetener? Is that safe to digest in your body?
Do you digest them differently?
No, if you take those artificial, I think these are artificial sweeteners, so to speak. Is that right? Are these safe to consume?
That's a difficult question because artificial sweeteners they're relatively new, some of them especially. So there's not enough research to really confirm whether or not they're harmful. Because so far we really don't have any. So, depending on who you ask, they're not harmful unless you consume them in large quantities, which I don't think most people do. So that is something to keep in mind if you're going to use them like as a substitute in brownies, because you're going to use a lot more than just the amount that you would to like sweeten your tea or something like that. So for consuming them in large quantities, I would not recommend that. But if you're just using them, especially as a way to kind of to start to cut back on sugar, they can be a helpful tool, but they're not necessarily the best. So that's just something to keep in mind. There's a lot of controversy about that. We don't have a lot of firm evidence on whether or not they're quote unquote healthy for you. But yes, I would agree with you. Natural sugar is going to be the best because they're not processed. Although your sugar is going to your digestion is going to break them down all the same because your body really doesn't know the difference between all types of sugar in general. So if you're going to have sugar, I would recommend choosing a natural sugar rather than a lot of those refined processed ones.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to say that I wanted to make a chocolate cake this week, so I did, and I got a recipe out of my mom's, and it was 1 cup of sugar it was 2 cups of flour and 2 cups of sugar. So I thought, now I can't do that. I won't, that's too sweet. And of course I did cut it down, but it's like, and it was fine. So it's like, gosh, how did, and my mom was an excellent baker. So I don't know. Why do we eat all that sugar back then? So.
Yeah, I know. It really is crazy when you pay attention to it because like I made some cookies the other day and I added probably almost 2 cups of sugar. And like, it really is a lot. And just cutting back a little bit isn't going to change the flavor that much.
Right.
And if you continue to do that, your taste buds will kind of adapt to that. And when you go back and have a regular brownie or a regular cookie, it's going to be insanely sweet to you. And unfortunately, a lot of Americans are just adjusted to that amount of sweetness. So that's what they kind of expect and what they crave. So whenever you first start cutting back on sugar and you have those lower sugar options, they're not going to taste as good to you. but your taste buds will adjust, and you'll probably end up preferring those in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Okay.
I know granulated sugar everybody considers to be the norm, but is it
Mhm.
really, because it doesn't come in that form naturally, so is it really considered to be processed, or is it considered to be natural?
Just regular white granulated sugar.
Yes, ma'am.
That is a processed sugar because it is bleached and refined. But as far as like calories and things go, it doesn't make that big of a difference. It just kind of really depends on what your priorities are. So
Right.
it's really up to you. Because like I said, some of them, they do vary a little bit in calories, but white sugar is processed because it is bleached. So if you've ever seen like natural cane sugar, it has a little bit of a yellow tint. And it's usually like the grain of it is a little bit thicker. But as far as like the calories go, they're really not that different. And like I said, your body's going to break them both down the same. So it just kind of depends on what your priorities are. Like if you want something that is less refined and you like organic products and things like that, you might choose like the natural cane sugar instead of white sugar.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
These are all great questions. I'm glad you all seem interested in this. Shows me that we can have more lessons like this. Okay, so before I switch my screen, does anyone have more questions or comments? I'm going to show you all some packages here in a second. I'm going to switch to my document camera. Okay, so can you all see this okay? Yes. Okay, so like I mentioned, for a 2,000 calorie diet, USDA recommends 12 teaspoons maximum. So this is what 12 teaspoons of sugar looks like. So this is a pretty small bowl, which, I mean, this is a pretty good amount of sugar. So this is 12 teaspoons, probably, I don't know, maybe a quarter or a third of a cup. This is the 22 teaspoons that most Americans eat in a day. And this is probably almost a cup. So that's almost double what the USDA recommends. So I'm going to show you all how added sugar can add up very quickly in a normal day of eating. So one of the activities in here is to go through and look at packages and kind of write out sugar and carbohydrates, which is a good activity to do if you all do this in person. So you can kind of do something like this where you kind of make up a day of eating and then you can work together to see how much sugar that actually is. So that's what I'm going to do. I was going to print out the activity sheet, but I've not been back to our office in about a week. So I didn't have access to a printer. So I'm just going to write it. I don't have the best handwriting, so I hope that you all can see it okay. Okay. So a normal day of eating, we're going to wake up and we're going to have some oatmeal for breakfast. And so a lot of people really like those Quaker oatmeals, like the little packets that you eat. If you ever notice, those packets don't have a lot of calories in them. I think there's only about 100 calories in a packet. So eating 2 packets of oatmeal is fine. It's actually probably better than one because a 100 calorie meal for breakfast isn't very much. So we're going to have 3 packets of oatmeal in the morning. The brown sugar or the maple cinnamon, whatever the most popular flavor is. And then say for lunch, we're going to have a can of soup, tomato soup. So we're going to have just regular can of Campbell's tomato soup. And then we're going to have a side salad with our favorite salad dressing. And then say we're kind of hungry in the afternoon. We want a snack to hold us over into dinner. So we might have a granola bar. So we're going to have let's say we have kind of a sweet tooth. We want something sweet. We're going to have a chocolate chip Cliff bar for our snack. And then at dinner time, we have thrown a pork tenderloin in the crock pot. So we're going to make shredded pork sandwiches for dinner. And we're going to add our favorite barbecue sauce to it. And then we're going to have that with a side of broccoli and tater tots with ketchup. Okay, so it's a pretty normal day of eating, probably for most people. So we're going to see, and like a lot of these things you wouldn't think much of, like they're pretty normal products. You wouldn't think would have much sugar in them. And I'm going to show you all exactly how much sugar you add it all up. And keep in mind, this doesn't include any beverages at all. This is just in food. Does anybody have a guess how much sugar this would add up to? You can guess in grams or teaspoons, and it could just be wild guess, whatever you all think. No guesses?
1,000
1,000?
calories,
Grams?
I guess. I'm thinking.
Calories.
Yeah, calories.
I didn't calculate calories. Any guess for, we'll guess for teaspoons.
Five or six teaspoons of sugar.
5 or 6?
Yeah.
Okay,
No.
good guess?
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Okay,
I'll say 20.
20 what? Teaspoons?
20 teaspoons.
Daggone, you're almost right on it. Yeah, it's about 20 teaspoons total. And I'll show you all where exactly that comes from. So it's about 79 grams of sugar. This is just added sugar for the day, which equals about 20 teaspoons of sugar. And keep in mind, the recommended amount was 12 grams of added sugar. Or no, 12 teaspoons, sorry. So just in our food alone, we already have 20 teaspoons from what seems like a normal day of eating. So in our oatmeal packets, we had 12 grams because each packet had 6 grams of added sugar. And that's about 3 teaspoons, which, is not too bad. When I make oatmeal at home, I probably put in about half a teaspoon or half a tablespoon to a tablespoon of sugar. So that's not too bad. But then we get down to the soup. So we have 1 can of Campbell's tomato soup. And this is where looking at serving sizes is important because when you glance at the package, it said 90 calories or whatever per serving, but the whole can had, I think, like 2 or 3 servings in it, which really added up whenever I was looking at the sugar. So in 1 can of that soup was 20 grams of added sugar, which was about 5 teaspoons. And then salad dressing is another one that has quite a bit of added sugar, depending on what kind you use exactly, because they all kind of vary. But for like an average balsamic dressing, again, depending on the brand, it usually had 2 to 4 grams per serving, and usually the serving is 2 tablespoons. So that would add, we'll say 4 grams, which is about 1 teaspoon, depending on how much you use. And then the Cliff Bar. So if I was doing this in person, I probably would have just purchased all these things so you all could see. But with being the weather and everything, I didn't get to do that. So I did kind of raid my pantry for some things, and this was one thing that I did find, Cliff Bar. So for our Cliff Bar, which a lot of people associate these with being healthy, I don't really know why. I guess because they're kind of in the health food section sometimes. if you look at the package, let's find the sugar. I don't know if you all can read this very well. The document camera is a little blurry. It says 19 grams of added sugar in just this one granola bar. So in our Cliff Bar, we had 19 grams, which ended up being about 5 teaspoons of sugar, a little bit under that. And then we move on to our dinner. So we had barbecue pork. So the main culprit for the added sugar is going to be from our barbecue sauce. And that is one, if you look at barbecue sauces, they have a lot of sugar. And I don't know about you all, but I like a lot of barbecue sauce on my pork sandwich. So portion size is going to be something to be mindful of. But for one serving of our barbecue sauce, we had 16 grams of sugar. And I think the serving was only a couple tablespoons. So that's 4 teaspoons in just our barbecue sauce. And then the other amount of sugar is going to be from our ketchup. So condiments, again, are have a lot of, depending on what kind you use, can have a lot of added sugar. So the ketchup had about 8 grams, which is 2 teaspoons of sugar. So when you add it all up, 20 teaspoons of sugar, 79 grams. So that's way above our recommended 12 teaspoons. And again, that is just from our food. We're not even including any beverages. So if you had a soda in the afternoon, or you like to put sugar in your coffee, if you like juice with your breakfast, all of those are going to add even more. So you can see how this adds up really, really quickly without really even noticing. And these are all from pretty normal foods. So imagine if we had like a Pop-Tart for breakfast. So Pop-Tarts, pretty popular food, especially among kids. And when we look at the, you all can see this, when we look at the nutrition label, see there's a bit of a glare on here. There we go. Okay, so used to, Pop-Tarts, when you looked at the serving size, it used to be 1 pastry. But now it's 2 pastries, which is great because most people are probably going to eat them both if they're having them for breakfast. So you go down and look at the total sugars down here. There's 30 grams of added sugar in these 2 Pop-Tarts. So you might as well be eating a king-size candy bar for breakfast if you're having a Pop-Tart. Because in this king-size Kit Kat, we've got 36 grams of added sugar in the whole thing. So pretty close to the 30 grams in Pop-Tarts. So if you're starting out your day with Pop-Tarts, you're already consuming a lot of your sugar, more than the amount of sugar you would need in a day. And then, so let's see. So what could you eat instead? So like we mentioned, all those ways to cut back on sugar is substituting fruit as a sweetener. So instead of having the packaged oatmeal, you could make your own oatmeal just by buying quick oats and then adding some fruit on top, like sliced bananas or something, to get that sweetness. It's not coming from sugar. And that will probably be a little bit more cost effective too, because quick oats are so cheap and they're easy to make on your own. And then for things like, so we've noticed from this menu, it was a lot of packaged foods. So if you make some of these things yourself, you're easily going to cut back on a lot of that added sugar because packaged foods are the main culprit for the added sugar. So if you made your own soup or you found a lower sugar, lower sodium, whatever kind of canned soup, you can do that instead. And that's where looking at the label is going to be really key. Same thing with the salad dressing and condiments. You can usually find lower sugar options, or you can make your own salad dressing, which is very easy to do. And you can use things that you probably already have in your pantry to make your own salad dressing. For things like granola bars, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of options for granola bars or like little snack bars throughout the day. And you can, just by looking at the labels, you can probably make smarter choices by picking ones that don't have added sugar or less. So this would be one of them. This is one of my favorites, are these date bars. So this is the Kroger version of a Lira bar. And so they have all kinds of flavors of these, but these bars are made from mainly dates. And so they're naturally sweetened. They don't have any of the added sugar. And then all of the sweetness comes from the fruit in here. If I can focus this, I'll show you all. Okay, so when you look at the total sugar, it's 21 grams, but the added sugar is 0. And that's because the ingredients on here are only dates, almonds, unsweetened apples, walnuts, raisins, and cinnamon. So all the sweetness is coming from the fruit in here. And you're also getting the fiber from that as well. So when you are eating something, because I mentioned if you are going to have sugar, you want to have it with something that's going to be a little bit more nutrient dense. And so, for example, fruit, when you're having a piece of fruit, you are getting the natural sugar, but you're also getting the vitamins and minerals, and not to mention the fiber. So that's going to help balance your blood sugar a little bit better. It's going to take a little bit longer for your body to digest. It's going to keep you fuller for longer. It's ultimately going to be a better option because you're getting other nutrients with that sugar. So,
in regard to this box here, for a diabetic, would you not need to consider the sugar, just the regular sugar in it?
So, if you're a diabetic, are you asking if you be paying attention to the natural sugar?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a really good question because I'm gonna stop my share. I don't think I have anything else on here. But there's a big misunderstanding with diabetics, or especially type 2 diabetics, because they think that, number one, they think that sugar is what caused them to have diabetes. And so they think that they're not allowed to have sugar anymore. And so instead they'll just find, the same thing that they used to eat made with sugar substitutes, like cakes and pies and cookies. And that's not necessarily helpful. The best advice I would give somebody with diabetes, and probably, hopefully your doctor or dietitian would too, is to pay attention to things like fiber and vitamins and minerals, and have things, like if you're going to have sugar, have it with something that has fiber in it, like fruit, for example, because my dad has type 2 diabetes, and I would give him, like if we were out in public or whatever and he needed a snack, I'd be like, here, have a banana. And he's like, I can't have a banana, it's going to be my blood sugar. Right. And I hear that a lot, diabetics avoiding or saying they can't have fruit because of the sugar. But you have to keep in mind, when you have that fruit, you're also getting the fiber and the vitamins and minerals, which is going to keep your blood sugar more stable. Because when you just have sugar, like sugar from candy or cookies or whatever it might be, your blood sugar is going to spike. And so you're just going to be on this roller coaster all day. And that is not necessarily good for your body, cause a lot of stress. So when you do have sugar, you want to kind of balance it out with things with fiber and protein, something that's going to take longer for your body to digest and break down, than just having regular sugar. So yeah, I would keep in mind, if you have diabetes, just total added sugar. But I wouldn't say totally avoid it. Just be more mindful about having things that are going to give you a little bit more value than calories.
Thank you.
And like I said, this is something that we could probably talk about all day. It's really difficult to just go over stuff like this in 1 hour, because there's just a lot to know about not only sugar, but just in nutrition in general. And there's a lot of information out there that can be confusing or misleading. You're not really sure what to do, what's right. So it's kind of tough to just go over this in 1 hour. So I'm glad that you all have questions, because I'm sure I'm skipping over some things that you all are curious about.
I have one comment about the condiments. I used to be a school nurse, and a school nurse friend of mine, we had a student who liked to have lots of ketchup with their lunch. They wanted to eat like 9 packets of ketchup. And usually she was diabetic. So usually we didn't count all that extra sugar. We didn't usually count condiments that much. But when you have that much, you really have to pay attention to how much sugar their intake is from their condiments.
Yeah, I know. And like I mentioned, condiments, they can be, and like that's one of the things where you can mindlessly eat a lot of ketchup and you're like, you don't think twice about it, and it adds a lot of sugar and you don't realize it. And especially with kids, some like to have a lot of ketchup or dipping sauce or whatever for the fries and then chicken nuggets. One thing I will show you all, if anybody likes to go to like Chick-fil-A and get the Chick-fil-A sauce, if you look up the nutrition information for that, it's like one of the worst ones that you can choose, at least as far as calories go. But I'll show you all how you can kind of identify how much sugar is in these little packages like that. So I'm going to grab one. I think I have one in my refrigerator. Okay, so on here, these only show the ingredients. They don't show calories or grams of sugar or anything like that. So that's why knowing how to read the ingredients list and knowing what things mean can be really helpful when you have things like this. So let me pull up my document camera again so I can show you all this. Okay. So here is a Chick-fil-A sauce. Oh, and this is one thing I forgot to go over earlier. When you're reading the ingredients list, the ingredients are listed in order of quantity. So the first thing that shows up is going to have the most volume in this product. So you can see the ingredients. The first ingredient on here is oil, and then the second one is sugar. So automatically we know there's going to be quite a bit of sugar in this product. It's going to make up the majority of it. We've got soybean oil, sugar, so it's easy to recognize that one. Next one's barbecue sauce, which you can see has corn syrup in it. And then we go on down, and looks like that's about it. So there's no strange words for sugar on this one, but you can see the second ingredient is sugar, which is a key indicator that this is going to be something that's probably high in sugar. So this is a pretty small package. When I go to Chick-fil-A, this is my favorite one to get. I usually eat 2 of these with mine. So that is one way where it really does add up quickly. And like I said, barbecue sauce is another one too, that has a lot of sugar in it typically, as well as ketchup. These are things like just like our beverages, we don't really think a lot about how much we're drinking. We mainly pay attention to like our food, how much we're eating. And a lot of times we can get a lot of extra sugar and calories and we're not even realizing it because we're not paying attention to what we're drinking or what we're dipping our food in. So, like I said, you'd be pretty surprised if you track today and how much. You have a question?
Yes. If you try baking with stevia, how do you compare the amounts of artificial sweetener to the amount of sugar called for in the recipe?
So if you're substituting a sugar substitute for sugar in your baking, usually if you buy it from the baking aisle, it will probably tell you on the package the ratio that you should use. And I think most of them are a 1-to-1, because a lot of them are like a mixture of a sugar or a sweetener. But if you're not sure, like if you just have like Stevia or xylitol or something that just comes in a big bag and doesn't tell you, I would just look it up online, because sweeteners, depending on what kind, can be like hundreds to thousands times sweeter than sugar. And so you wouldn't necessarily want to use a 1-to-1 ratio for some of them. But a lot of them are going to be 1-to-1, like the ones you find in the baking aisle. So I would pay attention to the packaging and see if it tells you. If not, I probably would just Google it Or you can just experiment too if it's like something small like oatmeal or something like that. Does anybody use baking substitutes regularly? Anybody a fan?
My son is diabetic, and I've tried it, on one or two things from him for him. So I'm not that familiar with it yet.
Yeah, it's really kind of I know some people that don't like, because I mean obviously it's going to change the taste if you're using the substitute as opposed to regular sugar. So some people like it, some people don't. I think it's kind of an acquired taste, like I mentioned before. But those baking mixes that you get in the baking aisle, like I said, it's not like a blend of sugar and sugar substitute, so it's not too much of a difference. But if you never tried substituting with sugar, maybe start with one of those before you go all the way and see how you like it. They can be a little bit expensive.
Mm-hmm.
My husband is diabetic, and I do make his favorite is the chocolate oatmeal no bake cookies.
Mm-hmm.
So I put Truvia in that, and you can taste a little bit of a difference, but it still gives him the sweet taste that he craves, and so he loves them.
Mm-hmm.
But then I've used the like Swerve and different things like that, and they turn out really well. But I usually, like what you suggested, I normally try to use like pear sauce or apple sauce or something like that in it. And and figs are great. They are very sweet. So I usually try to use them because they're more natural.
Yeah. And there are so many more products like that now than there used to be. So options are much greater than probably they were 5 or even 10 years ago. But yeah, you mentioned figs. These are, I was about to show these to you earlier. These little fig bars are like one of my very favorite snacks. And so these are sweetened with figs. And they do have some sugar in there too. But another one you mentioned, use figs to sweeten your baking. Another one that's really good to use is dates. If anyone has ever used those like large medjool dates you can find at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
I use those as a sugar substitute as a 1-to-1 ratio. You can kind of make I make a date puree with it. So I just blend them in my blender and I use that as a substitute and it works really well, in baked goods. It kind of has it almost tastes like caramel to me. Like they're very, very sweet and it's all from natural sugar and it also adds that fiber and I'm sure lots of vitamins and minerals too.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I've used that in several muffin recipes. And I will mention dates are expensive. So I only buy them every now and then and use them, but they do last a long time if you can find them in bulk. And you can keep them in your refrigerator and freezer and they'll last quite a long time. So that's one option.
Kendyl,
yeah.
do you know anything about the new one out made from monk fruit?
The monk fruit sweeteners?
Yes.
I've seen them before. I've never used them. I know they're very popular. Those are going to be, I don't think it's totally calorie free. I think those are a low calorie sweetener. But yeah, honestly, I don't really know very much about that one. Sorry. Are there any other questions or comments? I'm going to put the link to the evaluation in the chat box. So if you all don't mind to click on that and complete it, it should only take you a couple minutes at most. Well, just let me out. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? We've had some really good conversation today, which has been great. Sometimes it's hard to do these if I feel like I'm just talking to my computer by myself. Okay, so in the chat, I've put the link to the survey. I'm also going to put my email in the chat. So if you all do have questions or you think of something later and you want to reach out to me, feel free to send me an email. And again, I am the Powell County FCS agent, so you could try to reach me at the office. I'm not always there, but you can leave me a message and I'll get back to you all. But yeah, so again, for the materials that you all have for your leader lesson, you'll have the PowerPoint, the evaluation, a couple of activities. Oh, we didn't talk about the goals one. I'll bring that up really quickly. So one of the activities, I'll share my screen again before I let you all go show you guys these. So the first activity I mentioned earlier is this one, where you just kind of go over the nutrition facts panels and you can choose a food item and you look at the servings, the calories, sugar, and all of that, which would be fun. I would recommend doing this if you all do this in person. Is like you can find maybe your favorite snack or your favorite drink and just kind of go through, break down these items, or you can make up a day of eating together as a group. Your other activity is the goal setting one. And so there's two things you do in here. First, when you kind of examine your own food choices and you set a goal based on that. So the example here is cereal. So say you have a bowl of cereal every day for breakfast and it's Frosted Flakes. One of the goals you can do is to find a swap for that that's going to be lower sugar. So maybe you'll find like regular cornflakes and put fruit in it as a sweetener instead. And so you can kind of make your own goals based on your food choices. And I think it would be fun to do this as a group too, or as a club. The other one is setting a goal. So again, your first one would be to compare labels and choose. The example here is to choose 3 substitutes for higher sugar foods of things that you're already eating. So one of those might be your cereal. Another one might be your afternoon soda or your coffee. And then maybe you eat spaghetti once a week and you find a lower sugar option for your pasta sauce. You could also, like I mentioned, do this as a group or as a club and maybe decide as a club we're not going to serve soda at our potluck lunches or dinners. Or we're not going to serve sugar sweetened beverages, and kind of have that be like a group policy for your group goal for the year or the month or however long you all decide. It doesn't have to be something you do on your own. I think it'd be fun to do as a group or even as with your family or your household, kind of talk about these things. And it is kind of fun to go through your pantry or your refrigerator and find all of those things, like look at the labels and find things that are kind of a higher sugar food, maybe something that you didn't expect. So those are your activities. This is the flyer, which you can customize, and the evaluation. So this is the paper evaluation that you all should have received. The same questions as I put in that one online. I think that's all of the materials that you guys got. All right, so any other questions from you all before I let you go for lunch?
I have a question. What are good sources? What are good sources of recipes for
low sugar options?
Yeah.
I think we have some publications. I know we have one on recipe like swaps or substitutes. And I'll try and find it and see if I can get it out to you all somehow. But most of them are just going to be cutting back on your sugar. And you can do things that you're already using. So I mentioned, or even doing the substitute. So I mentioned when I make my muffins, I'll just find some recipe off the internet and then I'll make my own swap to it. So I would either just use the amount that it recommends and cut back 25%. So if the recipe calls for a cup of sugar, I'll just add 3/4 of a cup instead. Or I'll find a substitute to use instead, like you could use applesauce, or like the date paste that I mentioned. You can use
So, well, what's the on that kind of thing? Like how much date paste or how much? I'm probably not going to make date paste. How much? Like if you used applesauce, like how much applesauce to sugar? Is it a 1-to-1?
It's probably not going to be a 1-to-1. And actually, I always use applesauce as a substitute for oil in my recipes. So, and you can kind of, if you're unsure, you can kind of use baby steps. So for example, I will replace the fat. So whether that be butter or oil with applesauce. And I think it's recommended 1-to-1 for those. But if you're unsure about it, you can do half. So if the recipe calls for half a cup of oil, do 1/4 cup applesauce, 1/4 cup oil. But the date paste, and most of what I've learned, I've just learned from the internet, honestly.
Okay. Okay.
And from trial and error. But for the date paste, I use 1-to-1. And for baking substitutes, again, for those blends, just follow the package directions. They're usually pretty clear.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. And for honey, I know a lot of people will use honey as a substitute. I think it's recommended just 1-to-1 too. And as you go on, you can really experiment on your own and slowly kind of cut back and see how much exactly you prefer or you like, because it probably will be different for different people. No, it's probably not the answer that you wanted, but any other questions or comments?
I would tell her if I'm looking for a particular thing, I Google it, and you'd be surprised the recipes that come up.
Yes, there is so many things out there on the internet. Some good, some bad, and you'll find out which ones are the bad ones when you come out with cookies that are like a sheet of paper. Okay, so like I mentioned, I am recording this. I'm going to post it. I'll probably edit a lot of the extra things out because I think I've been recording for about an hour now. And I'll post it on my Facebook page. It's just Powell County Family Consumer Sciences. So you can find it there if you want to watch it again, or maybe you missed something, or if you have a friend that missed it, you can refer them there. It probably will take me a few days to edit it and post it. But keep an eye out for that. Again, if you have any questions, you can email me or call or leave me a voicemail at the extension office. In the chat, I have the link to the post evaluation if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes to fill it out. And if you all don't have any other comments or questions, I'm going to stop the recording and end the meeting. You all have been a great group today. I appreciate how active you guys have been in the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everybody stay safe and stay warm, and hopefully can see you all relatively soon.
You're right. Thank you, Kendyl.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.